Everyone wants to be in great relationships, but great relationships don't just happen. And in this episode of Beyond at Home, we're going to explore 2 myths that will get in the way of you having great relationships. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a question that you can ask to ensure that you never fall for these 2 myths again. But in order to do that, we're going to go back to the place where these 2 myths started for so many of us, high school. The first myth is something called the right person myth. Now, this isn't the idea that there's a right person for everyone. This is the myth that once you find the right person, everything will be all right. Let me show you what I mean with an example. In this example, girl meets boy. Girl is impressed with boy because of his huge muscles and insanely good looks. Boy is just happy that girl likes him, so they start dating. And at the start of the relationship, everything is great. There's plenty of selfies together, they never argue, they've got the feels. But over time, things aren't as natural. Things aren't as easy. So they decide that the reason there's problems is because they're not the right person for each other. So they break up in order to go and find the right next person. Now, when we put all that together, it sounds silly, right? But so often, that's the way in which we approach relationships. But there's an even more damaging part of that myth. It's that once you find the right person, everything will be all right, including you. This is the idea that once you find the right person, your bad financial habits will go away. Your porn addiction will go away. Your insecurities will go away. And this myth is harmful because this myth is fueled by the idea that once you find the right person, they'll solve everything with you. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to fix anything. Just find the right person and they'll fix it for you. So that's the first destructive relational myth. And here's the second one. I like to call it the promise myth. And the promise myth is that a promise replaces the need for preparation. This is the idea that you can make a promise, you can make a vow, and just by making that promise or vow that you will have a healthy, long-term relationship. But you and I know that promises don't make up for a lack of preparation. In fact, anyone who's played sport knows this, that you can't just promise to have a good game. You can't just promise to break a PB. You have to prepare. And I'm going to say something super controversial, but just hear me out. When it comes to relationships, commitment is way overrated. And here's what I mean by that. I do does not equal I can. Just because you commit to do something doesn't mean you're able to. And if you've committed to do something without being capable of doing something, that just leaves you accountable, which often leaves you miserable. Now, I know it might seem like I'm being a little bit of a downer, but I promise I don't mean to be. In fact, I think this is where the message of Jesus comes alive in the midst of these relationship tensions. Because Jesus introduced a brand new relational paradigm into the world. It was simple, but it was demanding. It was compelling, and it was rewarding. And if you embrace this relational paradigm, whether you're a Jesus follower or not, this paradigm will help you become a better boyfriend, a better girlfriend, a better husband, a better wife, a better fiance, a better spouse. So let me introduce you to that paradigm right now. And Jesus' best mate, John, records the words of Jesus as he introduced this brand new relational paradigm. And Jesus does this through an illustration. And when Jesus uses an illustration, there's always 3 parts. There's always a God part, a Jesus part, and an us part. And Jesus uses this idea of a vine and branches. Jesus says, I am the vine and my Father is the gardener. And then he goes on to say he cuts off every branch that doesn't produce fruit. And you might say, well, cut off. Why would he do that? Well, because the purpose of being connected to Jesus is so that you and I would produce fruit. And then Jesus goes on and he says, but he prunes all the branches that are connected. Why? So that they'll produce more fruit. Then Jesus goes on to say, those who remain in me and I in them will produce fruit. Now, don't miss what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying that if you stay connected to me, there's a promise attached. And the promise is that not maybe you'll produce fruit, not if you work hard enough you'll produce fruit, but if you stay connected to me, your life will produce fruit. Then Jesus defines what he means by fruit. He says, I have loved you as the Father has loved me. remain in my love. And so really what Jesus is getting at is, if you remain in me, the fruit that your life will produce is love. And so at this point, all Jesus' followers who are listening in are like, okay, so God's the gardener, you're the vine, and if we stay connected to you, we'll remain in your love. And Jesus is like, yep, you're nailing it. They're like, well, how do we do that? And then Jesus says this, you remain in my love when you obey my commandments. And I can imagine everyone just rolling their eyes and being like, see, I told you. I knew he was going to bring it back to some law or some rules or some commandments. That's what they always do. And then I imagine Jesus turning to John and saying, hey, make sure you get this down because this is going to blow people's minds. He says, this is my commandment. To which I could imagine John would be like, didn't you just say commandments? Jesus goes, no, there's only one. Love each other. And John, I could imagine, just stops writing. He's like, Jesus, we already know that one. We've already been doing that well. And Jesus goes, I'm not finished. Love each other the way that I have loved you. And the reason Jesus says this is because he wants to really clearly define what type of love he's talking about. Because what he's saying is the world doesn't need more love. The world needs a focused kind of love. The world needs a different kind of love. And his disciples wouldn't have fully understood this until a few days later, because this ultimate demonstration that Jesus gave would have taken the breath of the disciples away, because it took Jesus's breath away. And what Jesus is driving at, and what the disciples would have finally understood in that moment, is that ultimately Jesus is more concerned with who you become than who you find. And it's this idea of becoming, not finding, that will completely transform the way you view relationships. It'll ensure that your relationships are never undermined by the right person myth or the promise myth. Now, at the start of this episode, I said I had a question that you could ask that would help you avoid these myths. What it didn't tell you is that this question is also about becoming. Now, I've got two questions. One for people who are dating or engaged or hope to date, and one for people who are married. So the first question is for dating or for people who hope to date. You ready? Here it is. It's, are you the person that the person you're looking for is looking for? Now, I know you can hear that and you can go like, Chris, that doesn't matter. I'm not interested in that. When I find them, it'll be all right. But here's why this is so important. Because one day, you might find the person that you're looking for. But if you never took some steps to become the person that they were looking for, then they'll be the person you were looking for, but you won't be the person that they were looking for. Married people, here's your version of the question, okay? Are you still the person they were looking for? Or has career or kids or finances gotten in the way and crowded it all out? And this is scary, but if you're married, you can take this a step further. You can have a coffee or a wine or a conversation together, and you can ask each other this question and say, hey, am I still the person you're looking for? This question is scary, but it's worth it, and it'll help you avoid those two relational myths. Now, I know asking these questions is scary, and there's part of you that's probably like, I just don't want to do it. But asking these questions is how you become a person worth looking for. Married people, this is how you become a person worth staying for. So in between now and the time you watch the next episode, take the time to ask that question. We'll pick up the conversation right there. Hey, thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Beyond at Home. If you want to take a next step or connect, then just simply click the I'm You card down below, and we would love to get to know you. Other than that, we'll see you in our next video.